Hello and welcome to another episode of the Dyson Leadership Podcast. And today I am joined by Ann McNeil, who is a speaker and does a lot of communication. And one of the things that she speaks on quite often is, you might have heard of it, by Napoleon Hill, Think and Grow Rich. This is something I would consider her more of an expert on, but she's got some insights and just some thoughts to share with us, the podcast audience. And I'm excited to hear what Ann has to share with us today. So, Ann, how about you go ahead and introduce yourself? Just share a little bit about yourself, and I'll let you kind of introduce our topic and the reason we're talking about Think and Grow Rich for today.
Absolutely, Nick. It is an awesome opportunity to be here with you to share. My name is Ann McNeil, and I am the Master Wealth Builder, helping to build stronger and better lives and businesses, utilizing my McNeill Factor framework that I developed from reading the book Think and Grow Rich. And I love sharing the story, Nick, because it was 9 p.m., December 31st, 1979, when I first picked up a copy of the book. My husband and friends decided to go out and celebrate the new year. I decided to stay home and read actually this book, which is I'm in this version of the book, Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. There are lots of versions. There's lots of versions of the book. What has encouraged, pulled, and inspired me Nick, all these years, one page, 28 of the book. I've built 5 businesses from that one page of the book. Yes. First Black female contract in the state of Florida, operating at the level that we do, focusing on billion-dollar programs. Yes, I'm a very small business, but from being asked the question by Napoleon Hill, I'd like to ask all of your listeners to ask yourself this question. On page 28 of that book, he asked me, I made it personal, Nick. He said, Ann McNeil, how much money do you want? And that night, Nick, I realized no one had ever asked me, how much money do I want? You see, because like many of us, I took whatever people were willing to give me for a job. But in reading this book, starting with the first principle of desire, I realized that we must all have a dream to have a dream come true. And that night started my journey on the self-discovery and this 40 plus years of personal and professional growth and development, aspiring others to do the same.
Absolutely. And I know just that question alone, I didn't get it maybe in that setting or in that way or from a book. But I remember talking to a person, and funny enough, they were pitching me, trying to get me to join a multi-level marketing company or organization. But he asked me that question. He's like, how much money would it take for you to earn on a yearly basis just to be happy? And I give him a number pretty quick. And it for him, it threw him off because he was expecting a young person like me to throw out millions of dollars or something kind of crazy. And it's one of those, I want to be realistic, but at the same time, it's when you have that goal and have that target that really gives you something to aim for and something to work towards. So for me in Dyson Leadership, I set annual revenue numbers, and this is what I want my business to earn this year as it's growing. And I keep increasing that number because I can't keep it the same. That means I'm not growing. But at the same time, I'm working towards an ultimate target where I have a number listed on my computer, and this is my target and this is what I want to get to. Obviously, I want to go beyond that, but I'm building up to that number. And so it's kind of the same concept to some extent, which I'm interested in. So you mentioned just a growth and personal development journey. So what did that look like getting started? Because a lot of people, they know of growth and personal development, but they don't know the getting started or what that actually looks like. So what did that look like for you?
Well, when I booked and I started focusing on the money, when Napoleon had asked me, number 1, how much money do you want? Number 2, he asked me, what are you willing to do to make the money? Then he asked me, by what date do you want that money by? Then he asked me to write a plan. Now here comes the personal growth and development, because I realized that night that a plan for a job oftentimes may be very different than a plan for a career or life goal, if you will, in terms of entrepreneurship. Everybody's not interested in entrepreneurship. But as I began to continue in the other principles of the book, toward the end of the entire book, I came upon a process that he called self-analysis questions. And this is where the personal and professional growth and development began to take life. There's about 60 plus questions that he asked. And all of these questions dealt with the different areas of character, life, just character building questions. And over time, what I began to do, actually, I wrote this book. It's entitled, You Must Have a Dream to Have a Dream Come True, utilizing 10 categories, Nick, and the 10 categories coming to your question about personal growth and development and how do people get started. There are 10 categories that I am finding that works for me to set goals and to grow. And the first one is mindset. Mindset relative to your spiritual life. No particular religion. It's not about that. It is about connecting with the inner spirit, if you will. And what are you reading to do that? That's where my personal growth and development comes. Secondly, the family. Family goals, family mission statement. And when you think, Nick, about your own personal life, whether you are a father, a brother, a son, an uncle, a cousin, but all of these areas of our family, do we have a goal in each of those areas? And so there are books that I've read that deal with the family. Third area is financial. And when he talked about the money, as I began to live in this process, I began to learn that it's not so much about what you make, Nick, it's more about what you keep from what you make. And so then I began to read by authors. Susie Arman, during the day, I read everything she wrote. One of my favorites is called You've Earned It, Don't Lose It. David Block, and in all of his books, The Automatic Millionaire, Start Late, Finish Rich, Become a Millionaire After 50, all of these different books about money. But the best one ever for me is an organization called Better Investing, where I learned about the power of investing in the market, but becoming an educated investor. And I read a book called The Millionaire Next Door, Nick, where it talked about this group of ladies that beat the stock market, and they formed an investment club. And so I'd already started my first mastermind group, and I decided, I went to our group and said, listen, why don't we read this book together called The Millionaire Next Door? And why don't we contact this organization called, at the time it was called the National Association for Investment Clubs. Now it's called Better Investing. And you can go to betterinvesting.org. Free membership, 90 days, very, very nominal, but I'm a volunteer with them. But Nick, we were able to create over 20 different investment clubs, investing only $20 per month. But again, we're talking about personal growth and development. And then in the area of education, I have a list of books that I read in each of these areas. So educational goals. When I started this process, I had an undergraduate degree in accounting, and I was in the process of working on a master's degree. But I went to a trade school, Nick. I went to a trade school to learn construction. And fast forward, 2 general contracting licenses, just celebrated my 45th year in this industry, all from reading, right? And then we go on to personal growth and development, and we go on to health. One of my favorite health books is called You're Not Sick, You're Thirsty. Another one, and I see a lot of books behind you, so you like to read too. But one of my all-time favorites is called Fit for Life 2, sharing with me the power of food combining, small exercises like just jumping on just a trampoline, just up and down. But as I began to look at what am I reading in each area of my life, business, I have quite a few business books I'm reading right now. I think about 7. One of my favorites right now is E-Myth Revisited, Clockwork, and the entire book system by EOS, Entrepreneurial Operating System, Traction, that whole series, read all of those books. And then I go on to recreation. I did a challenge, Nick, a few weeks ago, where I took a recreational goal after reading about the benefits of parks, and I set a goal to go to a different park every day, no matter whether I travel to Chicago or Atlanta. And I put in my schedule, visit a park while I'm here. Got to the hotel, found out a park that was walking distance, and out of 30 days, I hit 27 days. So going on to the civic areas of our lives and reading something in that area. But my favorite is creativity. My goal is to publish a book a year, but my favorite book is Julia Cameron's The Artist's Way, talking about the power of morning pages and just the power of journaling. So those are some ways, Nick, that I am finding that I work to enhance my personal growth and development, but also my professional growth and development. So those are just some thoughts to consider.
Absolutely. The phrase comes to mind as you're talking and going through that is leaders are readers. And
Absolutely.
That's something I believe it's, even if you don't see yourself as a leader, if you're just looking to grow professionally, grow personally, grow in faith, whatever it might be, reading is one of the great ways to do that because you can gain knowledge and wisdom from others and
absolutely
really apply that to your life. I mean, you referenced all the books behind me. This is one of multiple bookshelves, and I'm the type of person, some people don't care to read, and I understand that, but there's audiobooks, there's podcasts, there's YouTube channels, there's so many other avenues that you can go and gain insights from other people. And that's something that's so impactful and so helpful for so many people. So one thing that we had talked about, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, and for those who are listening to us, if you're interested, I do have a QR code that we'll share with a number of the different books per category that I've read. And so we'll share that toward the end of the podcast. But
yeah, absolutely.
Just in case, you can go to annmcneil.com and there's a list of books there. Thank you.
All right. So one of the things we talked about in our correspondence before was the idea of niche to be rich, which is kind of coming from the think and grow rich mindset and topic. And one of the things that you had referenced in those correspondence is 6 businesses that you are in. And I'm really curious about that and kind of that concept. And if you will, explain that to me and to the podcast audience, because I'm really curious where we're going to go with that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And thank you for asking the question. When I started on this journey with this process from Napoleon Hill about how much do you want, doing what, by when, I had a really good corporate job, and I decided to look at how could I, because the amount of money that I decided I wanted to make was $1,000. Now, this was 1979, December 31st, 1979, at 9 p.m. to be exact. But when I began to look at how could I make an extra $1,000 at a good corporate job, I realized for the first time in my adult life, Nick, that not only was I broke, but I was also broken. And I could not, in my mind, I could not see saving $1,000 without learning how to make an additional amount of money, and also learning how to get out of lots of debt that I'd acquired from owning rental properties. So as I began this process, the first business that I realized when I started my construction company, I realized that the first business, even though we say business and we think of it as one business, is not, in my opinion, McNeill factor. I think the first business we're really in is the mindset business, if you will. And it's the mindset business of your expertise, your craft. So I am a contractor. What does that mean? What is my expertise? What business am I really in as a contractor? Now, let's pretend I am a painter. I'm not. I'm a general contractor, but I'm just going to use a painter for example. My expertise is the first business I am in. Am I certified in that business as a painter? Am I technically competent in that business as a painter? Looking at the expertise, whoever you are listening to us, your expertise is the first business that you're in. And do your friends and your coworkers, do they know you as an expert in that space X? That's the first business. The second business that I'm learning that we're all in is the business of that expertise. The operations of the business, that includes your accounts payables, your accounts receivables, your HR, all of those factors, business development, all of those factors that normally we're not taught those. And that's why I love the book E-Myth Revisited, right? We're not taught those when we are in that skill set only on a job. We know how to paint. But do you know the business of painting? That's the second business that you're in. And it is a business. And if you don't think so, don't pay your taxes. We'll come back to that another day. The third business, yes, I have experience in that. Yes. The third business that we're in, Nick, is the business. I call it the business of your industry. You see, even as a painter who owns a business, so you got a painter is number one, your expertise. Number two is the operations of your business. But then number three is what industry is your business in? The industry is a business, Nick, all by itself. So let's go back to being a painter. As a painter, are you in an industry of transportation? How about water utilities? How about healthcare? How about airports? How about facilities and schools? There's so many, Nick, there's so many different sectors and industries as a painter you could be in. Most times we don't think of an industry as a business all by itself. But if you were to search and research all of the different conferences and associations, just in the construction industry by itself, and I'm a contractor, and I'm in about 50 of them myself, as I own an industry every 10 years. Yes, and that's what I have to learn. I'm learning it, actually, and I'm an expert at it too, right? Yes, but the industry. So let's say that you are a painter with a business, and you are in, well, first you need to learn where the money is, and this is where the industry becomes so vitally important. Because when you do the analysis, Nick, on the industry as a painter, you will find that each industry will yield you a different type of profit. But if you don't study the industry as a business by itself, you can be in a low profit earning industry, not realizing that all you have to do is stay in your niche, if you will, as a craft, but change industries. And this is what I teach my clients in construction. Many of them are not making the amount of profit that they could make because they're in the wrong industry. Now, so we talked about the industry of your niche. We talked about the business of your niche, the business of the operations, the business of your industry, but also you have the business, I call it the business of the business of the business. And that is the business of relationships. The relationship business, Nick, is a business all by itself. And oftentimes we don't realize it as I'll go back to being a painter. You can be a painter and you have the best skills. You have the best price. But someone outcompeted you because they had a relationship with the client who was asking for the price. That client can be an agency. That client can be an architect or an engineer or an individual. The point is this: if we are not in the business of building relationships, and I go back to reading, Nick, this is what I'm learning. And the more I read in an area that deals with relationship building, it doesn't matter if it's Jeffrey Gitomer's, all of the books he writes about relationship building. There's so many wonderful books out there you can read and so many places you can live in. But look at where does your client go? Go there and begin to build relationships in that organization. Now, that brings us to the associations inside of an industry. So again, the niche of your craft, the niche of the business of the operations, the niche of your industry, the niche of your relationships. But the other business, Nick, and I talked about it earlier, is the business of money. Money, Nick, is a business all by itself. Now, why do I say that? Because oftentimes as a small business or a large business, we don't realize that the money you make trading time for dollars will never outcompete the money making money if you invest in your retirement. Now, I learned from a $20 investment, Nick, that it's not always about what you make, because oftentimes we say, well, I don't have enough to do this. I don't have enough to save. I don't have enough. What is $20, Nick? What is $20 if you take $20 and you put it on your K? What if you take $20 and you put it on your Roth IRA? What if you take $20 and you put it on short-term saving, Nick? What if you take $20 and put on long-term savings? And I think that COVID has taught us that you also, in addition to all of that, you must also have an emergency fund. If you take $20 and put in an emergency fund, that's 5 20s. How much is that, Nick? Only $100. Only $100. Now, if we don't have $100 after working an entire month, not a week, not a day, but an entire month, to learn how to save and invest. And then over time, when you get into the rhythm, ask every retirement account, IRA, 401k, whatever it is. Now, what's my point about the money? If we don't learn, Nick, that money is a business, and that's why I've been a volunteer for over 25 years with this organization called Better Investing, and you can go there, and we're all volunteers all over the United States. We don't get paid. We don't sell any products or services. betterinvesting.org, Nick. And we teach other people how to analyze stocks and how to invest, all on a platform. So the business of money is number 5. Now, number six is the business of death. Do you know how big that business is, Nick? Now, imagine when you amass all of this money and you don't have everything set up properly. I'm not talking about a will. I'm talking about a trust. I'm talking about writing your obituary before you go. I'm talking about the business of death. Oftentimes, we don't want to have that conversation, Nick, because we think we're going to be here forever. I just had some news this morning. One of my employees, her sister passed last night. Unexpected. It happens to every single one of us. But are we ready? Are we ready to ensure ourselves that when it comes, not just for ourselves, Nick, and oftentimes people don't want to talk about this. I've decided I want to talk about it. You know why I decided I want to talk about it, Nick? Because I had a loved one to pass, my father. And then, Nick, my mom passed. And we found out that the home that we lived in, we did not own that home because another relative neglected to put my father's name on the deed, a property he paid for all his life. Now, what's my point here? If you don't take care of your final wishes, somebody else will not do that for you. And so everything we've earned, and personally, Nick, I was in probate court for 15 years. 15 years on a piece of property that had no mortgage, free and clear. 15 years. The judge died. The lawyer died. This person died. And the court, all because it was not put in a trust, it was put in a will. Now, who talks about that? But it's a business of money, and you can just do a few things. I'm not selling anything, Nick, in terms of those products, but I just want to make people aware that you can niche to be rich in every area of your life, but you must have a plan and a process. And for those individuals who are interested in continuing this conversation, yes, you can connect with me at annmcneil.com. But Nick, those are the niche to be rich 6 businesses that you're in.
Yeah, that's really interesting just kind of to think of it. And even as you're going through these 6 businesses, I'm thinking through it in my life and with my business that I'm running here, Dyson Leadership. And it's really interesting because you think about the industry, it's a training and development, business consulting, that kind of thing. Who am I working with? Who are my primary customers? You talk about, are you in the right industry as far as what revenue you're going to be making or what income you're going to have? Just an example for me that I think of is I work with multiple different industries. That's kind of the perk of being in the training and development side. But it's very true where if I go gain customers in the nonprofit or a church space, they don't have the same kind of finances that I can charge them the same way I would a Fortune 500 company or a Fortune 1000 company. And so I could make one customer in a Fortune 1000 and it probably be the same as if I would go and find 3 or 4 in the nonprofit space. And so where do I spend more of my energy for growing a business? And it's a balance because I do have customers in the nonprofit and church space, and I do service those and I do try to give them my full effort, but I have to be mindful of how much energy I'm spending in certain areas to be mindful of how I'm growing. It's interesting too, when you talk about relationships, here's just a perfect practical example. I am not the only training and development business or consultant here in my area. There's a bunch. There's ones that do, Lean Six Sigma, some that do leadership, some that do a true just business consulting, how to grow your business. There's just all kinds of different niche topics that these consultants go in. There's one of them that aligns really closely to me, and I can pretty much guarantee I have less overhead and I can beat their costs. Having those relationships with people is huge for business and personal success. Networking is vital to a person's success. And so that's something, as you're talking about that, what organizations to be involved in, who do you network with, who do you talk with? Absolutely. I've been through all of that. Most things you're explaining, I'm sitting here going, I've not heard it explained in that way, but I've been going through this over the past, 4 or 5 years. I'm right there with you and understand. So the insights you have are spot on. So podcast audience, I do want to interject this really quick. The books that have been referenced and Ann's website that she has referenced, all of those things, I will be including all of those in the description of the podcast. So if you do want to connect, reach out, find one of these books that maybe she's referenced, check the podcast description, and I will have that there for you. So one other quick thing that I want us to touch on, and I don't want to take up too much of our time, but I want to give plenty of time for this conversation because this is just absolutely great. But you talked about 6 keys to be rich. That's something else that you had included in the information. And I want our podcast audience to be able to hear kind of a high level or you to kind of introduce that idea. What are the 6 keys to be rich?
Well, I go back to page 28 in Napoleon Hill's book, and I also mention it in my book, You Must Have a Dream to Have a Dream Come True. The 6 keys, and I cannot express this enough. It is so simple that we oftentimes miss it. There are millions of people all over the world that have read Think and Grow Rich. Millions. I am a volunteer, Nick. I sit on the board for the National Speakers Association. And in 2016, I created, first was a beta test from this idea of the 6 keys. And we did the beta test and businesses started going through the roof. From the beta test, we did I created along with a group, was called Black NSA $1 Million Mastermind. And in there, we walked through these 6 keys 10 weeks. And this is twice a year. And this last cohort, we just finished the first week of December. And in 10 weeks, the individuals had made over $4 million from this process. It is so simple. And it starts like this. The first key is, how much money do you want? So simple. So if I were to ask you, Nick, how much money do you want? What would you say? This is not a test question. This is real. You would say how much money? Let me give an example. 6 figures could be 999 times 6. I mean, six digits, right? Sure. It can be 1, 0. It could be anything. You've got to give me an exact number. Now, I don't want you to answer the question publicly. I want you to think about it quietly. while I go through my 6 steps, right? These are 6 keys for everybody who's listening. See, this is what I did, and I still do this to this day. 1979, 1980, 81, 82, every single week. How much money do you want? What's an exact number? What are you going to do in return for the money? What are you going to give? It must be a product or service. And many of my clients, Nick, when I talk to them about this, they talk about, oh, I want to donate, I want to give, I want to be a philanthropist. But you've got to have money to do that. How are you going to make the money? So that's the second thing. The third thing you must do is you must set a date, an exact date. Exact amount of money, exact skill, and an exact date. Now, all 3 of these may change, Nick. This is the key. But the fourth thing you must do is, and the fourth key is, you've got to have a plan. Where is your plan? Now, number 5 is that you're going to write an affirmation statement. Number 6, you're going to repeat that statement twice a day. You're going to repeat it aloud. So I'm going to recap it again. And if you're interested in these six keys, these 6 steps, you can text the number 59925 and I'll send that to you. Just put Ann in the chat. Okay? Just text 59925 and just put Ann in the chat. I'll send that to you. Again, to repeat, how much do you want? Number 1, what are you going to do in return for the money? And it's got to be some kind of product or service you're going to sell. The third is, what date do you want the money by? And number 4 is your plan. Number 5 is your affirmation statement, something simple. If you say, I would have X number of dollars doing X by X date, and my plan is to make 100 calls a day. Whatever it is your plan. Something simple and short that you can memorize. But the last step, the last key, the last point, Nick, is you must be willing to recite that affirmation statement twice a day. This is what I've done since 1979, and I've created 5 businesses, thousands of people that have participated in this process, and it is so simple, it just goes right over our head. That's it.
It reminds me a lot of the research where I've seen it, that one of the biggest things you can do in goal setting is literally just physically writing it down. And that in itself, I believe the number is you're 40% more likely to achieve your goal if you just write it down. And it's so simple, but yet so few people
At least
do it.
40%.
As far as yes. And then I've seen it and I'm familiar with it too, as far as the affirmations or writing things now. I've heard it so many times from different leadership experts, authors, writers, speakers, and so on, where they do that kind of thing, where they write something down, then they repeat it multiple times a day. I think of kind of the funny one. John Maxwell talked about a speaker was pushing for urgency one time and told them before they go to bed, say the phrase, do it now 50 times every night. And I think it was for a month. And that sounds ridiculous when you hear it. And that's the reason most people don't do it, is they hear it and go, oh, that just sounds silly. I'm not going to do that. But it puts a sense of urgency, because then it puts that thought in your mind. It changes your thinking, so that when you actually are faced with a decision or something you need to do, in his instance, what's the first thing that comes to mind? Do it now. Don't put it off. Don't wait. Don't procrastinate. Do it now. It gives a sense of urgency. And so even in what you're talking about, when you set that specific target, I will have this money doing this service or product and do this type of objective, whatever you are writing out, you are putting that over and over in your mind, so that it's what you think about. It changes your thinking. You're not thinking about, what am I going to eat for dinner? Am I going to go and, do this thing? Or do I need to, clean up my house in this way? One of the things that's going to come in your mind with all of those common thoughts are, well, what do I need to do to grow my business? What do I need to do to grow myself professionally? Have I made my phone calls? Have I sent my emails? Have I done these things to grow my business? It changes the thoughts that come up in your head. So I completely agree. It's something that's so simple, but yet so powerful in how it can impact people. And I have absolutely enjoyed this conversation, all the insights, all the wisdom that you've given, and this has been fantastic. I want to give you just a quick opportunity. If you have any final thoughts that you want to share with the podcast audience, any kind of final bits of wisdom. And one question that I very often ask my podcast guest, and I want to go ahead and present it to you that you might want to include here as well, is for a young leader or young professional, somebody that's really just getting started on their journey. If you had just a short bit of time and you could give them just one quick bit of advice, what's one thing that you would tell them to help them get started in their journey?
I would say read the book, Think and Grow Rich, with an accountability group. Read the book and allow the book to read you with an accountability group.
Yeah, I think
that would be my one thing that I would share.
Good advice. I think I can even take that and kind of add to, find any personal development, personal growth books. That's a great one. I own it and would recommend it. But I would also recommend, others. Find some leadership, personal development, personal growth books and intentionally go through them. Find an accountability group, a mastermind group, something, and read them with people that'll help be there for your accountability and grow professionally. I think that makes a big difference as you grow and get started on your journey. And any other final thoughts you want to share with our podcast audience from today?
Yes. You mentioned about the books, and I would say I do have a download, which we're going to put the information in the chat, but you can go to annmcneil.com and you can get the download for a list of books, because just like Nick is saying, there's so many books that you can read in every area of your life. I talked a lot about investing as a young person, especially as a professional or a student. My youngest daughter started investing at age 11, and she did that power of compound interest, where we say, max out your retirement for 5 years and stop. And we're actually right now on a world cruise, a crystal world cruise together. She retired at early 30s, because of the money working harder for her than her working for the money. And so there's so many examples like that. But again, it goes back to reading. It goes back to reading and learning. And like Nick is saying, first, you must have a dream. And of course, I would be remiss if I did not promote my own book entitled You Must Have a Dream to Have a Dream Come True, where I go over many of the stories and examples from my own life, but many of the books that I've read and the benefit, like Nick is saying, that it has had in my life and still having right now to this day. So I want to thank you, Nick, for the opportunity to share with your audience. And I'm looking forward to also sharing this with my audience also.
Absolutely. And I look forward to getting this out for the podcast audience. I've enjoyed this conversation because it's one of those things where a lot of these concepts, you hear them in different perspectives. And, I wasn't sure where we were going with 6 businesses that you're in or 6 keys to riches. And when I hear you talk through them, I've heard some of these concepts just worded in different ways, and it really helps me resonate, but it also helps reinforce. And I hope maybe that's something that helps our podcast audience. As you're listening, you say, I've heard some of these, but maybe some of these are new. It helps reinforce, maybe give you some new ideas, maybe give you some ideas of some new things to check out. Hopefully it'll help you grow, maybe think differently, and really impact you. So, Ann, I do want to say again, thank you for being on the podcast. It's been a pleasure to meet you and speak with you, be able to interview you. And it's been a pleasure to just have you and connect with you. So thank you again for being here with us today. Podcast audience, be sure to follow along, subscribe wherever you find and enjoy this content. Be sure to check the description for all of the content that me and Ann have talked about today, and be on the lookout for more episodes coming throughout the rest of this year on the Dyson Leadership Podcast.